The night Instructor Vrethkal decided to test us, he thought he had us figured out. He had been teaching at the Interstellar Defense Academy for 11 years. 11 years of watching alien cadets break, bend, flee, or freeze. He'd seen Calorian trainees collapse under pressure simulations. He'd watched 3 separate Vexari cadets request emotional reassignment after a single week of survival drills. He'd even, and this one still circulated in the faculty lounge, seen a Drathian, a species with 4 limbs designed purely for combat, burst into what could only be described as uncontrollable weeping after a night ambush training exercise went sideways. So when the first full cohort of human cadets arrived at the Vale Station Academy in the outer Meridian Belt, Vrethkal wasn't worried. He was curious, sure. Humans were new to the galactic community, still smelled like their planet, something mineral and warm that made his sensory ridges twitch, still moved like they expected gravity to change on them at any second, still had that unsettling habit of making eye contact for too long and smiling at things that weren't funny. But weak, that was well documented. Humans were soft-bodied, no natural armor, no venom glands, no echolocation or thermal vision. Their auditory range was laughably limited. Their lifespan by galactic standards was almost tragic. Vrethkal had read the intake assessments. He'd spoken to the Terran liaison officer who processed their enrollment paperwork. He had, in his words, done his research. What he hadn't done, and this is the part none of the faculty at Vale Station will admit openly, was ask a human what they were afraid of. That was his first mistake. Let me back up. My name is Corporal Cadet Reyes, Mara Elise. Serial intake number A7741H. The H stands for human, which in the early days of the Academy's integration program felt less like a classification and more like a warning label. I was 23 years old when I arrived at Vale Station. I had grown up in Guadalajara, done 2 years of Earth Defense Corps training, tested into the Interstellar Exchange Program, and spent 6 weeks in transit on a ship that smelled like recycled air and institutional-grade protein paste. I spoke passable galactic standard by then, could read basic Calorian script, and had watched enough orientation hollows to know what most species looked like up close. None of that prepared me for the Academy. The structure alone was disorienting. Vale Station was built into the side of an asteroid, not on top of it, into it, and the corridors ran in directions that didn't make immediate architectural sense to a human brain. Floors curved where they should have been flat. Lighting shifted based on a species-neutral comfort algorithm that mostly succeeded at making everyone slightly uncomfortable. The gravity ran at about 0.87 Earth standard, which sounds like it should feel lighter but actually felt like something was always about to go wrong. There were 41 of us. 41 human cadets, first cohort, dumped into a facility designed for 11 other species, with an instructor roster that had collectively spent about 60 combined hours interacting with humans before we arrived. Instructor Vrethkal was the one they assigned to lead our primary training block. The first time I saw him, he was standing at the head of the orientation chamber, a tall, gray-green figure, bipedal but with a forward hunch that made him look like he was perpetually ready to sprint. His facial structure was narrow. He had 4 upper limbs, 2 of which he kept folded against his torso when he wasn't using them. His eyes were pale amber, with horizontal irises that tracked motion the way a hawk does, not moving the eye, moving the whole head in small, precise increments. He looked at us the way a veterinarian looks at a species they've read about but never treated. "Human cohort," he said, in clipped galactic standard. "You are here because your species applied for integration, not because you were selected, not because we believe you are ready. You are here because the treaty requires. We give you the opportunity to prove yourselves capable." 41 human cadets stood in formation. Nobody said anything. A few people shuffled slightly. Vrethkal's head tilted, that precise hawk tracking motion. I have been informed, he continued, that humans respond better to direct communication than to formal protocol, so I will be direct. In 3 months, you will either be Academy cadets or you will be sent home. The washout rate for alien integration cohorts is 67%. I do not expect humans to perform better than average. He paused. In the back row, my bunkmate cadet Tours, Diego Armando, leaned 1 centimeter toward me and whispered, "Did he just say he expects us to fail?" "Yes," I whispered back. "Cool," Tours said. "I hate him already." I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling. The first month was brutal in the specific way that institutional systems are brutal. Not one catastrophic thing, but 10,000 small ones accumulating. The training schedule ran on Vale Station's local time cycle, which didn't map cleanly onto human circadian rhythms. We were sleeping in 5-hour chunks separated by 9-hour training blocks. The food was calibrated to a generalized alien nutritional baseline that technically met human requirements, but tasted like someone had described flavor to a computer, and the computer had done its best. The physical training was designed for species with greater baseline durability, which meant our human bodies spent the first 2 weeks in a constant state of managed injury. Vrethkal ran every session. He was relentless in a way that felt personal, though I don't think it was. He just didn't have a setting for gentle. The concept seemed to genuinely confuse him. When Cadet Akafer, blessing Chitty, fractured 2 fingers during an obstacle sequence and kept going for another 40 minutes before mentioning it, Vrethkal stopped the entire drill and stared at her with those amber eyes for about 10 full seconds. "You sustained injury," he said. "Yes, sir." "Why did you not report it?" Akafer looked at her hand, then at him. "Because we weren't done, sir." Another long pause. "You are human," he said. It wasn't a question. It was more like a man reminding himself of a fact he kept forgetting. "Last time I checked," Akafer said. He dismissed her to the medic bay, but I caught him watching the rest of us for the next hour with a slightly different expression than usual. Still unreadable, alien faces are difficult even after months of observation, but different. Less like a veterinarian, more like something else. I didn't know what to call it yet. The survival training block started in week 5. This was where Vrethkal had his plan. The concept of the escape drill was standard academy curriculum. It had been run with dozens of cohorts across a dozen species. The structure was simple. Cadets were taken to an isolated sector of the station's lower maintenance ring, placed in a situation designed to induce stress and urgency, and observed. The goal officially was to test decision-making under pressure, to see who panicked, who froze, who led, who folded. But the real thing Vrethkal was looking for, the thing he'd always been looking for in every cohort he'd run the drill on, was the breaking point. The moment a cadet's training collided with their instinct and instinct won, because instinct, he believed, was the truest measure of what a species was capable of under real conditions, not the cleaned-up version they performed in evaluation, the raw thing. Every species had a different shape to their breaking point. Calorians went rigid and stopped processing new information. Vexari fragmented. They tried to do everything simultaneously and accomplished nothing. Drathians, despite their fearsome physical profile, had a deep-coded response to certain acoustic frequencies that essentially bypassed their rational function. Humans, per the intake literature and the xenobehavioral assessments, were expected to scatter. Specifically, the threat stimulus Vrethkal had selected was a Voreth scout form. Not a real one. The Academy didn't bring live Voreth within 100 light-years of a training facility. What they used was an animatronic reconstruction, a full-scale replica built from sensor data and field observation, running on a behavioral AI programmed to replicate Voreth movement patterns with 92% accuracy. The Voreth, for context, were the thing most of the galaxy had nightmares about. Not because they were evil exactly. They didn't have ideology. They didn't have goals in the way political entities have goals. They were apex predators who had achieved space travel, which was either the universe's greatest achievement or its most alarming one, depending on your perspective. They were large, 2.5 to 3 meters, quadrupedal with a secondary pair of limbs that could function as either arms or additional legs depending on terrain. Their skin ran layered plates of something between chitin and bone. Their sensory range was extraordinary, and they made a sound when they were tracking prey that was specifically calibrated by 10,000 years of evolution to trigger alarm responses in nearly every species they'd ever encountered. The sound was below the usual threshold of conscious hearing, infrasound, technically, but it hit something in the body before it hit the brain. Every species who'd had contact with Voreth described the same thing: a sudden, sourceless dread, a feeling of wrongness, the body saying run before the mind had finished deciding. The behavioral AI in the replica could produce this sound. That was the test. Vrethkal's expectation was that when the Voreth replica came around the corner of the maintenance corridor and hit the infrasound trigger, the human cadets would scatter. Not because they were cowardly. He'd already adjusted his assessment of human cowardice after watching Akafar run a drill on a broken hand, but because scattering was the appropriate evolved response to an apex predator. Every species did it. It was practically galactic law. The cadets who scattered fastest and most efficiently would score highest. The ones who froze would score lower. And the whole point was to see what humans did when the brain's higher functions got bypassed and the old animal machinery took over. He'd done this drill 47 times. He knew how it went. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was what we'd been doing during lights out in the barracks. Tours had started it 2 weeks in, when the 7 of us sharing bunk block C had spent an entire rest cycle unable to sleep, because the ventilation system was cycling at a frequency that made the metal walls hum. We'd been lying in our berths, staring at the ceiling, and Tors had said out of nowhere, "You know what I keep thinking about? That thing Vrethkal does with his head when he's surprised." "The tilt," I said. "The tilt, what is that?" "Predator species. They track movement with head position instead of eye movement. Means he's actually processing us as a potential threat stimulus when he does it." "He does it every time Akafar opens her mouth," said Cadet Vasquez Lena from the berth across. "Because Akafar is terrifying," said Cadet Park, Yi1. Without looking up from the technical manual, he was reading by bioluminescent tab light. "We should study them," Tors said. "All of the instructors learn their reads." It started as something to do in the dark when we couldn't sleep. It evolved into something else. 41 humans in an alien facility, all of whom had done some version of the same thing to survive in worlds where they were the smallest thing in the room, paying close attention, noticing the things that didn't quite fit the official version. Watching faces, body language, environmental cues, translating instinct into usable information. We weren't doing it strategically at first. We were just doing what humans do when they're somewhere unfamiliar and slightly afraid. We were reading the room. But after a while, we started comparing notes. I had been tracking Vrethkal's micro-expressions, the way his secondary limbs shifted when he was pleased versus when he was masking frustration. Tors had figured out the station's maintenance schedule well enough to predict when certain corridors would be unmonitored. Park had cross-referenced the Academy's stated training calendar with resource allocation logs he'd found in the public access terminals and identified 2 upcoming scheduled anomalies that didn't match standard drill protocols. "There's something planned for week 5, he said one night, showing me the discrepancy. Resource draw on the lower maintenance ring, non-standard power allocation, and a request for external equipment storage that got filed under training materials." "Something they brought in," I said. "Something big," he said. We started asking questions, carefully, individually, casual conversations with cadets from other species who'd been at the academy longer, lunchline exchanges that sounded like small talk but weren't. Okafor had a gift for this. She could make any conversation sound like friendly curiosity. By week 4, we had a rough picture. The drill, the Voreth replica, the infrasound, the expectation. We knew what was coming before Vrethkal walked into the briefing room and told us we'd be doing a survival navigation exercise in the lower maintenance ring. We had 1 week. The thing about humans that doesn't make it into the xenobehavioral assessments, the thing that can't be measured by intake testing, is what happens when you give a group of us a problem and a deadline. We get very quiet and very focused and very strange. Tors had a background in wilderness survival training. He'd grown up in a family that camped seriously, meaning actual desert camping with actual risk, not the recreational kind. He knew more about predator behavior than any of the rest of us, and he started running informal sessions in the back corner of the mess hall during low-traffic hours. Not theory, practical. How predators select targets. What makes prey look like prey. How to interrupt a threat assessment before it completes. Okafor had a degree in behavioral biology. She pulled up everything she could access on Voreth sensory systems through the Academy's educational database, which was publicly accessible because nobody had thought to restrict it. Park, who was methodical in a way that made the rest of us feel scattered, built a simulation in his head. He was the kind of person who worked through three-dimensional spatial problems purely mentally, no tools, and walked us through the maintenance corridor layout from memory, having spent 2 of his rest periods walking the accessible portions of the lower ring under the pretext of calibrating his fitness tracker. Vasquez found the infrasound range. This one took some work. She accessed a xenobiology database that contained field research on Voreth encounter responses, which listed the specific frequency range of the tracking vocalization. Then she pulled up a physics resource and reverse-engineered the approximate chamber resonance that would occur when the sound was produced in an enclosed corridor. The important thing, she said during one of our late-night planning sessions, is that it's designed to be felt before it's heard. It hits the body first, triggers adrenal response, elevated heart rate, the whole cascade. By the time you consciously know something is wrong, your body is already in flight mode. So the goal is to not let it trigger flight mode, Tors said. You can't stop the physiological response, Vasquez said. Adrenal cascade is automatic, but you can reframe what the response means. Like what? She looked at him. Like deciding that the feeling of fear is the starting signal, not the ending one. The room got quiet for a second. Then Tors said, "That's either very smart or very insane." "Both," Vasquez said, "definitely both." We went into the drill with a plan. I want to be honest about this. We were still afraid. The plan didn't take the fear away. I remember walking into the lower maintenance ring. The corridors were dimly lit. The air was colder than the upper levels, and there was a faint vibration in the floor that none of us talked about, and my heart was doing something unpleasant and irregular in my chest. We were in full training gear, standard-issue cadet suits with sensor arrays, no weapons because this was an observation drill, comm links that were being monitored by the training staff. Vrethkal himself wasn't in the corridor. He was watching from a monitoring station somewhere above us, along with 3 other Academy faculty members. The corridor we'd been assigned was a dead-end access branch, about 40 meters long, 3 meters wide, 3.5 meters high. Exposed conduit on the ceiling. Metal grid floor over a utility channel. The kind of space that swallowed sound in a specific way, so your own footsteps came back to you half a second late. We'd been given an official task. Locate a piece of salvage equipment at the far end of the corridor and bring it back to the access point. Simple. Designed to get us moving to a predetermined position. All 41 of us, in a dead-end corridor with one entrance. Perfect for a Voreth. We located the salvage marker at the end of the corridor. It was a data chip attached to a utility casing, nothing interesting. And that was when Park said, very quietly, "Formation." No ceremony, no discussion. The human cadets in Corridor 7, Maintenance Ring 4, Vale Station Outer Meridian Academy, arranged themselves. The 6 cadets with the widest shoulder spans went to the front. Cadet Kim Soo-jin was our tallest at 6 feet 2, and she went to the middle of the front row. Tors went to the left flank. Akafer, who was built like someone had assembled her specifically for the purpose of taking up space impressively, went to the right. Behind them the next row, and the next. It wasn't a military formation exactly. It was tighter than that. Shoulder to shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth from the person on either side of me. We were filling the corridor, not running toward the entrance, not scrambling, not spreading out. Facing the entrance. Standing. Park had explained the reasoning a week earlier, and it was simple enough that none of us had questioned it. A predator assesses threat before committing to engagement. The assessment is based on target behavior. Prey scatters. Prey tries to escape. Prey presents a broken pattern, some running, some freezing, some colliding with each other. That makes individual targets visible. A predator doesn't expect its prey to form up. A predator doesn't expect its prey to face it. And a predator, in a corridor 3 meters wide, encountering 41 bipedal organisms standing shoulder to shoulder and staring back at it. Well, we didn't know for certain what it would do. But we had a theory. The sound came before we saw anything. Vasquez had been right. It hit the body first. A sensation below the threshold of hearing, not quite a vibration, not quite a sound, something that existed in the space between those things and registered somewhere below the ribs, in the stomach, behind the sternum. The sensation was specific and ancient and unmistakable in the way that only evolution can make something unmistakable. Something large is close, and it wants to eat you. I felt every hair on my body stand up simultaneously. I felt the adrenal dump hit my bloodstream like cold water. I felt my legs do a brief, involuntary calculation about whether they should start moving. And then, because we had practiced this, because Vasquez had said the feeling of fear is the starting signal, and I had sat with that in the dark of the barracks for 7 nights until I half believed it, I leaned forward. Not much, maybe 2 centimeters, a shift in weight, a change in posture. From collapse to forward pressure. To my left, Tors was doing the same thing. I could see it in my peripheral vision. That slight forward lean, like we were all preparing to push against something, not run from it. On the opposite end of the corridor, something moved. The Voreth replica entered from the access junction at the far end. They'd set it up to come in from behind us, which was clever, cutting off the escape route in the direction we'd walked. It appeared in the periphery of the group's vision first, registered as movement, and then fully entered the corridor. It was, I'll be honest, worse than I'd expected. The hollows and the field imagery didn't capture the scale properly. In a corridor that was 3.5 meters high, the thing's dorsal profile nearly scraped the conduit on the ceiling. The plating on its body caught the dim maintenance lighting and didn't reflect it cleanly. It absorbed it, broke it up, which was part of how the real Voreth did their approach. The secondary limbs were folded in a way that made them look vestigial until you understood they were coiled, not dormant. And the infrasound increased. It didn't get louder exactly. It got denser. The feeling of it in my chest became something more like a presence, like the air itself had acquired an opinion about what we should do. Every neuron in my body agreed with that opinion. And then from the front row, Cadet Kim Soo-jin said, very clearly and very calmly, in Korean-accented galactic standard, "Hold." Nobody moved. What Vrethkal saw on his monitoring screens, from a position 40 meters above in the observation station, watching through the thermal imaging array. 41 thermal signatures in a corridor, dense formation, standing, facing the stimulus. Not one signature breaking away from the group. Not one signature turning toward the exit. The Voreth replica, its AI calibrated on 10,000 behavioral data points, initiated standard assessment protocol. It advanced 3 steps, bringing itself to the midpoint of the corridor. The infrasound increased to maximum output. The replica's secondary limbs unfolded to full threat display. 41 thermal signatures held. Vrethkal later told the faculty debrief that this was the moment he began to experience what he described as a significant recalibration of assumptions. He was watching the thermal data, what he saw. Every human signature was running elevated. Heart rate elevated, peripheral temperature elevated, the classic indicators of an active adrenal response. They were afraid. The instruments confirmed it. Every single one of them was registering the physiological signature of acute threat response. They were afraid. And they were not moving. He watched one of the front row signatures, Kim, it turned out, actually step forward. 1 step, directly toward the replica. A thermal signature with every marker of fear, taking 1 step toward the thing that was producing the fear. Vrethkal had been teaching at the academy for 11 years. He had never seen this. I'll tell you what it felt like from inside. It felt like standing at the edge of something very high up, that specific sensation of the body knowing something the mind is still debating, legs that want to go backward but are being overridden by something more stubborn than instinct. The compromise being, don't move at all, stand here, stay in it. The Voreth replica took another step. It was close enough now that I could see the individual plating segments. They moved as it breathed, or did the thing that approximated breathing in the AI simulation. The secondary limbs were fully extended, adding another 1.5 meters to its effective width. Its sensory cluster, the thing that was roughly analogous to a face, though it wasn't a face in any recognizable way, was oriented toward us. Evaluating. That was the thing about apex predators that Tors had explained during our prep sessions. They don't want to fight. Fighting costs energy, risks injury, might not succeed. They want to eat. The whole purpose of the threat display is to break the prey's cohesion before committing to pursuit. Scatter them. Isolate targets. That's what the infrasound was for. That's what the unfolding secondary limbs were for. The display was an invitation to run. We weren't running. I could feel the group through the points of contact at my shoulders, the warmth, the slight trembling of people who were afraid and holding it. Akafar, to my right, had her chin up. I couldn't see her expression, but I knew from 2 months of proximity what her raised chin face looked like. It was the face she made when she was actively choosing to be somewhere difficult. Tors, to my left, let out a long, slow breath, the kind of breath you do on purpose. Metabolic reset. His shoulders dropped 1/2 inch, more relaxed. He was choosing to signal relaxed. Vasquez, 2 rows back, said something under her breath. I caught fragments, her mother's name, something about being okay, a thing she'd told herself enough times it had become automatic. The replica took another step. Kim took another step to meet it. She stopped about 4 meters from the thing. Her thermal signature was blazing on the monitors, Vrethkal told us later. Every fear indicator maxing out, but her body was still. Her head was up. She was making direct eye contact with the sensory cluster. The replica's AI hit a decision node. Assessment of prey group, 41 organisms. Cohesion, intact. Behavioral pattern does not match prey protocol. Subject alpha approaching instead of retreating. Secondary threat display triggered 0 flight response. Group behavioral signature, unknown. Threat recalculation required. The AI was sophisticated. It was calibrated on real Voreth behavioral data, which meant it was calibrated on how real Vorath responded to real situations. And real Vorath, when their threat display failed, when the prey didn't scatter, would do one of two things. They would escalate to physical contact, or they would reassess whether what they were looking at was actually prey. The thing about the AI was that it was designed for a training context. It was not going to make physical contact with cadets. That was a hard stop in its programming. Which meant the only remaining option was option 2. Reassess. The replica stopped. It held its position for 11 seconds. I counted. The infrasound continued. The feeling in my chest had become almost abstract by then, like background noise, like something I'd learned to leave at the edge of awareness. My legs were still doing the thing where they wanted to go somewhere else, but the something more stubborn than instinct was still doing its job. Nobody moved. Kim was still 4 meters from the thing, head up, eyes forward. Then the replica's secondary limbs began to fold. Slowly, one segment at a time. Threat display withdrawing. It took 4 more seconds for me to understand what was happening. Then Tors made a sound next to me, not a word, just a short exhale, half disbelief and half something that might have been laughter if it hadn't been too surprised to complete itself. The replica turned. Not all at once, a slow reorientation. The sensory cluster moved first, then the body followed. It took 3 steps back toward the access junction at the far end. Then it stopped again, turned its sensory cluster back toward us. Kim held its gaze. It turned away for the final time and moved back through the access junction. Gone. For a moment, the corridor was completely silent, except for the mechanical hum of the station infrastructure and 41 humans breathing. Then Akafor said, "Did that just work?" And Tors started laughing. A real laugh, not the half-finished one from before, a full laugh. The kind that meant the fear had to go somewhere and this was where it was going. And then someone else laughed, and then several more people. And within about 15 seconds most of the formation had dissolved into people grabbing each other's arms and shaking their heads and saying things in 6 different languages that all meant some version of "I cannot believe" that actually worked. I was one of them. I won't pretend I wasn't. Kim was not, though. Kim stood exactly where she'd been, 4 meters from where the replica had stopped, and after a moment she said, "Formation held. Well done, everyone." Calm, a little formal. Then she turned around, and there was something in her expression that was absolutely not calm. It was burning, controlled, the expression of someone who had been more afraid than she had let anyone see, and was only allowing herself to know that now that it was over. She caught my eye. "That was terrifying," she said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Do you think it actually would have worked on a real one?" I thought about it. "I think," I said, "we'd have to be a lot more afraid to find out." She almost smiled. Vrethkal called us back to the orientation chamber at 600 the following morning. He was already there when we arrived. Standing at the front, 4 upper limbs at his sides, amber eyes tracking each of us as we filed in. His expression, I had learned to read it over 2 months of close observation, was not the expression of an instructor preparing to deliver a debrief. It was something more complicated than that. We stood in formation, 41 humans still carrying the physiological aftermath of the previous night, a bit too still, a bit too alert, the kind of tiredness that comes after a body has been flooded with adrenaline and then had to come down from it. But steady, all of us. Vrethkal looked at us for a long time. "I have reviewed the monitoring data from last night's exercise," he said. "I have reviewed it 5 times. I have also sent it to 2 colleagues for independent analysis, because I wished to confirm that what I was seeing was what I was seeing." Nobody said anything. The infrasound vocalization you were exposed to triggers acute stress response in 96% of tested species. The remaining 4% show atypical neurological profiles and are flagged for further study. He paused. Your physiological data confirmed full acute stress response in all 41 cadets. He stopped again. His head did the tracking tilt. You were afraid, he said. Every single one of you was measurably, significantly afraid, and none of you ran. Akeffer in the third row said nothing, but I saw her jaw shift slightly. I designed that exercise, Vrethkal continued, to observe how your species responds to fear under pressure. I expected to see scatter pattern, flight response, perhaps some instances of freeze-end override in the higher functioning individuals, but statistical scatter across the group. He looked down the line of us. What I observed instead was coordinated non-flight behavior under acute fear stimulus, with zero group cohesion breakdown, initiated and maintained without command instruction. He paused. You organized this independently. Still nobody said anything. I would like to know, he said, how. Tors, to his credit, didn't hesitate for long. He glanced at me, I shrugged, and he stepped forward. We suspected the drill, he said. We put together what we could from the scheduling data and asked around. We figured there was going to be a threat stimulus in the lower ring. He didn't name sources or methods, just facts. Vrethkal's head tilted. You reverse-engineered the training curriculum. We tried to understand our environment, Tors said. That's a pretty normal human thing. And the formation. Park stepped forward. Predator threat assessment protocol is based on prey behavior pattern. A scattered group presents individual targets. A cohesive group, especially in a constrained environment, presents an obstacle assessment problem. If the predator can't break the group, it has to decide whether the group is prey or something else. Vrethkal looked at him for a long time. You read the Vorath behavioral literature. The Academy's database is publicly accessible, Park said. A pause. You used our own educational resources, Vrethkal said slowly, to prepare for an exercise that was designed to be unexpected. Yes, sir. And then you trained each other. Yes, sir. Another pause, longer this time. Vasquez, he said, the infrasound, you identified the frequency range. Vasquez stepped forward. It wasn't hard. The research is in the xenobiology section. The research is in the xenobiology section that is rated for advanced cadets in their third year, he said. Vasquez blinked. Oh, I didn't notice the rating. I genuinely could not tell if that was true. Vrethkal turned and walked to the far end of the room. He stood there for a moment with his back to us, which was, I knew from 2 months of studying him, unusual. He didn't like presenting his back to a room. When he turned around, his expression had settled into something I hadn't seen on him before. Not the evaluating look, not the almost surprised tilt, something more considered. In 11 years of training cadets at this academy, he said, I have run the threat response drill 47 times. The highest cohesion score ever recorded was 61%, meaning 61% of the group maintained position under the stimulus. That was of the Tari cohort. The Tari have a social bonding reflex that prevents individual flight during group threat scenarios. He looked at us. You achieved 100% cohesion. As a species with no such reflex. Nobody said anything. You did it, he said, by deciding to. Still nobody said anything. I need to revise my assessments, Vrethkal said, and there was something in his voice that was almost wondering. Not just of this cohort, of the species. The rest of the training block was different after that. Not easier. Vrethkal didn't become easier. If anything, the exercises got harder, but they got harder in the way that said, I want to see what else you can do, which felt different from hard in the way that said, I expect you to fail. That distinction, small as it might sound, made every session feel different. He changed the drill structure. Started designing scenarios that weren't in the standard curriculum. things he was building specifically to test the edges of what we'd shown. He wanted to know if the cohesion was replicable under different conditions, if the predator assessment logic could be applied to scenarios that weren't predator-shaped, if humans could sustain that kind of override for prolonged durations, or if it was a short-burn response. We answered those questions one drill at a time. Some we passed cleanly, some we didn't. There was a high-heat endurance scenario where 3 cadets had to be pulled, and we spent the debrief arguing with ourselves about the protocol breakdown, which Vrethkal found, if I was reading his expression right, genuinely interesting. He told us afterward that the argumentation itself was what he'd noted. We didn't blame each other. We argued about the decision, not the people. That's common, he asked. In a functioning group, yeah, Tors said. You argue about the thing, not the person. Otherwise, you're just making it personal and you're not solving anything. Vrethkal looked at Tors for a long moment. The Tari debrief sessions average 6 times longer than yours, he said, because they cannot separate those two things. Tors shrugged. We have a lot of practice with conflict. We've been doing it to each other for a long time. It does not trouble you, the conflict. Of course it troubles us. That's why we try to make it functional. Another long look. Then Vrethkal said, as if completing a thought he'd been working on for weeks, you are a species that has had to make peace with the things inside you that you cannot change. Tors thought about that. Yeah, he said, that's pretty much it. The last thing I want to tell you about happened in week 11, 3 weeks before the final evaluation. Vrethkal asked me to stay behind after a night nav session. The rest of the cohort filed out, and I stood in the training chamber while he went to the far console and pulled up the monitoring data from 11 weeks of our drills. He scrolled through it for a minute, not saying anything. Then he said, I owe you a corrected statement. I waited. In orientation, he said, I told you that I did not expect humans to perform better than average. I stated it as fact. He didn't turn around. It was not fact. It was assumption based on limited data. Corrected data produces a different conclusion. I know, I said. You knew at the time, he said. It wasn't accusatory, more like a confirmation. We suspected, I said. And you decided to prove otherwise. We decided not to prove anything, I said. We just decided to do what we needed to do. He turned around. The amber eyes tracked me with that precise motion. What is the difference? I thought about it. Proving something is for other people, I said. Doing what you need to do is for you. The first one gives someone else the power to define the outcome. The second one doesn't. He looked at me for a long time. I have been teaching at this academy for 11 years, he said. I learn something new every cohort, usually something about the species I am instructing. He turned back to the console. This cohort, he said, I learned something about myself. I wasn't sure what to say to that. You should go, he said, rest cycle. I turned to leave. Cadet raise. I stopped. The third-year xenobiology database, he said. I checked. It does have a difficulty rating on the access page. You have to confirm it to proceed. I paused. I'll let Vasquez know you noticed. She knew, he said. Obviously she knew. And when I glanced back, I could swear, though alien expressions are difficult to read, and I had only 11 weeks of data, that something in his face was doing the thing that in humans is called a smile. Not performing it. Just doing the thing that happens when you've been surprised into respecting something. We made it through final evaluations, all 41 of us. That had never happened before in the Academy's integration cohort history. Vrethkal presented the results at the close ceremony. He read out the cohort name, the completion rate, and then paused in the way he did when he was integrating something that surprised him. 100% completion, he said. First time in the Academy's recorded history for an alien integration cohort. The other instructors in the room made various species-appropriate responses to this information. Vrethkal did not. He looked at us. "I will note," he said, "for the faculty record, that the human cohort achieved this not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most physically capable species to come through this program. They achieved it by being, in my assessment, the most specifically adapted to the conditions of this particular test environment." "What conditions?" one of the other instructors asked. Vrethkal's head tilted. "Conditions," he said, "that required surviving inside their own fear long enough to do something useful with it." He looked at us one more time. "Dismissed," he said. And that was that. I think about it sometimes. Not the drill, though I think about the drill too. Everyone in that cohort does, but the moment after. Kim, standing 4 meters from a thing designed to be terrifying, and the question she asked me in the quiet after it backed away. "Do you think it actually would have worked on a real one?" I still don't know the answer. I hope I never have to find out. But I know what she was really asking, which was, are we actually what we think we are, or did we just get lucky? And the answer to that one, I think, is both. Always both. That's the thing about humans, we get lucky, and then we practice until the luck starts to look like something more deliberate. We fall down, and then we get up and argue about the best way to get up so that next time we fall down less. We're afraid of everything. We've always been afraid of everything. A few 100,000 years in the presence of things that wanted to eat us, and we learned every shape fear comes in. We learned its frequencies and its flavors. We learned how long it lasts and how to hold it and how to move while we're holding it. That's the thing the xenobehavioral assessments don't measure. They measure capability. They measure response time and physical parameters and threat handling in controlled conditions. They don't measure what 41 humans in a dark corridor will do when they decide together not to let the fear go where the fear wants to go. They don't measure what happens when creatures who have been afraid for 100,000 years look at the thing that's trying to scare them and just lean forward. That's the thing the galaxy was still figuring out about us. Honestly, I think we were still figuring it out too.